So I was doing a live stream with Clint over on Sweetcast, and that was cool. And we had the creator of the Hero comic book on, and I offered to do a review of this comic book for him. And one of the topics that came up, which I thought was interesting, was about whether we could be honest in reviewing, for instance, like the work of Ethan Van Schiver or the work of Richard C. Meyer. And, like in my opinion, I mean, it depends on your audience, obviously, but if we're doing a review to a Comicsgate audience, which let's face it, like the non-Comicsgaters are just going to hate it regardless because they can't separate the art from the artist necessarily. So they hate the artist, so they're not going to like the art. So now, who we're doing a review for? It's probably the people who presumably are Comicsgaters, and that would be like doing a critical review of the Bible for Christians. When it comes to the Comicsgate crowd, Ethan Van Schiver and Richard C. Meyer kind of define the genre. They are essentially the ones defining Comicsgate and saying what it is. And if this is their work, then how could we possibly criticize the work of what is defining the genre? I mean, all other works would basically need to be compared to those two, right? And that's why I say, as a consumer, don't mind saying, hey, I like Comicsgate because I want to be consuming things which are free from social justice. But as a producer, I have no idea like how I'm supposed to be able to say my project is a Comicsgate project because I'm not even really sure what that means. Like I'm just putting out there what I feel is a good comic. I certainly wasn't doing identity politics when I wrote it, so under that definition, it is a Comicsgate comic. So awesome. But I think when it comes to the people who are in that crowd, they're going to be more interested in, say, well, how does, forgive me for feeling it, it's a little reactionary because, I looked at the review I got from Michael Gutierrez for Bleeding Fool, where he was attacking my work, White Lily, as being full of identity politics and virtue signaling. And I'm like, okay, whatever. It's, there's a lot of what I feel is just kind of aping what they think like the big names would say. In this case, Ethan Van Sciver and Richard Meyer. And I don't necessarily feel that there's a ton of creativity and artistic expression in the genre yet. I mean, it's been newly defined. So how can we even really have any kind of artistic gauge? So I'm putting my work out there, and if other people say, "Oh yeah, this is Comicsgate," or "No, this ain't it," as Bleeding Fool apparently indicated, well then, hey, you know what? I did my best to tell a good story, and you guys either like it or you don't. But I don't feel we can really put out honest reviews of, say, the work. I'll call them the big two because I feel that they are essentially defining the genre and how the genre goes over time, 2 or 3 years down the road. Who even knows if Comicsgate is still going to be around? Like Gamergate came out and they, I guess accomplished their goal. They got more ethics in gamer-related journalism. But the thing that's different about Comicsgate is it's not only this kind of movement against the establishment, but it also is now becoming somewhat of an artistic brand, although it's very loosely defined artistic brand, and really there needs to be a few speakers for the movement who are willing to review the works and say, yes, this meets the stringent criteria. Essentially, Comicsgate needs to kind of have its own Comics Code Authority stamp that someone can look at, review the work, and then you can put the stamp on the book, and then on IndieCron, then they can go, oh yes, this other person said this was Comicsgate Code Authority approved, therefore, boom, there it is. And then it becomes less about like a motorcycle club of, oh, well, did you go through your blood initiation and did so and so say you're okay and have you, pissed off the right authorities that are against us, therefore we like you. I mean, right now it feels much more just like have the appropriate people smiled upon you and the non-appropriate people cursed you, in which case here's your Comicsgate badge. So anyway, and that's not art, that's just pure group affiliations, and who wants to get caught up in all that? Anyway, so taking a look at Hiro. All right, hardware integrated reanimation ordnance. Okay, well, covers interesting. I gotta say, all right. So I'm just gonna give my honest review here as a consumer. I don't like the look of the Hiro. Look of the Hiro is not appealing. The face is gone, so there's not a connection there, and yeah, all right. So I just the Hero's not doing much for me. Okay, so now we've got the war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and of course, growing up during the Cold War, I'm like, okay, well, how did we avoid nukes? Because according to the story, we're having to resort to this robot in order to essentially reanimate dead American soldiers in order to face against Soviet troops. And look, I hate to tell you this, but if it's us against the Russians and it's come down to who has more troops, we are in bad, bad, bad trouble. We should surrender at that point. But the story obviously doesn't address, because there's no way to address it, the fact that, or at least I haven't seen it addressed in the story yet, that how come the conflict didn't go nuclear, which was the big reason why we didn't get back in a shooting war, you know, when I was growing up in the 1980s. So, all right, but I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I want to go back to the 80s and this kind of throwback thing of, oh, hey, this is a comic from in the style of back when action comics were cool and action movies were cool. So who were the villains back in the 1980s? The Ruskies. Okay, it's the U.S. fighting the Ruskies. All right, well, I'm not in love with the premise. And the second premise that I'm not really in love with is that we have to have this robot that reanimates the dead. Like, like the military think of tanks and drones and missiles and explosions. If you have enough technology to build a robot that could reanimate the dead, wouldn't it just be easier if the robot was just the robot? I mean, grafting itself onto flesh doesn't seem like it's going to be a particularly big payoff. So I have some issues with the premise. And, obviously we're supposed to kind of put that aside and just appreciate the story. But, I mean, look, it takes you out of the story when you're like, Leah shouldn't be able to float through space. She should be dead. So, similar thing here. Like, I'm just having a real hard time with the premise. But, all right, so we open up. Created by Macho Dang and Muttman. Words by Dan. Fair enough. So we got the scientist. And we got the military guy yelling at him, Griffin, do you understand that the fate of the free world is at stake here? The DOD needs a solution now. Or should I give the keys to the candy store to Wheels here? I don't. So they got this military guy, and he's obviously supposed to be kind of overbearing, but I don't like his dialogue. Like, the military guy is just demanding that they go ahead with the robot project because otherwise they're surely going to lose the war. And he's not assuming any responsibility for the fact that the war is down to this desperate gamble. And he just comes off as a jerk who's kind of shirking his own responsibility or acknowledgement that maybe there was military failure here. And then he demands that the scientists say, okay, let's do the robot thing. So they do the robot thing, and then the robot thing doesn't quite work. There's a malfunction because this gets grafted onto the new guy. And, I got to say, when the new guy comes up, I like it where we can see it's suddenly RoboCop, where the guy's coming off the table. And suddenly I got to say, like, you know what, maybe this comic might have something for me. And he stands up and he's like, what am I? And then he immediately tries to, bash the room or find a way out. And then the military guy just freaks out and is yelling at him. And, they do an electromagnetic pulse to bring down the robot. And he's like, failures like this are unacceptable. I'm like, dude, like, at this point, like, the military man is clearly just another, like, a mindless antagonist. Like, whatever is going on for the scientists. The military man's just gonna go, "You're dumb. You're stupid. You can't do anything right." Like, I swear to God, like that's basically what the military guy says. Like every time it comes to him, he'll just say, "You can't do anything right." And characters like that are not compelling. So I recommend that there's some dialogue redo there. And this is just a issue zero preview comic, so there's not really a ton of plot to talk about. But the military guy essentially just keeps pissing the guy's Cheerios and saying, "You're stupid. You didn't do anything right." And then towards the end, he's like, "We got to get these 5 bodies on ice, reanimated back into the war." I'm like, dude, if you're in the middle of a world war, what possible difference are 5 soldiers going to make? So again, my brain keeps rejecting the premise. But other than that, I certainly felt like the hero had some moments there. I liked it when he rose off the table and was asking what he was, and it could be that I really fall in love with the story despite my premise issues. Anyway, Guinevere and the Divinity Factory was able to be successful on both Kickstarter and Indiegogo. There's a link down in the description if you want to go to Indiegogo and get in on either the end of the campaign or the in-demand store, depending on when it is you're listening to this. Take care. Bye.